Hello everyone, this is Movies with Michael. Well, we finally made it to the end of Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings trilogy. But before we get to talking about everything that is this film, if you haven't seen my videos on The Fellowship of the Ring or The Two Towers, you should go and check those out right now. But without further delay, let's get to talking about the epic conclusion of the trilogy, The Return of the King. The movie opens with a scene showing us how Smeagol came into the possession of the One Ring and how he was turned into the creature Gollum. Personally, I think this scene should have been an extended scene, and the killing of Saruman scene should have been kept in the theatrical cut. I know that Smeagol, them showing this, is supposed to be showing us Gollum's past that's only been talked about up until this point, but I think Gollum is a more interesting character the less you know about him. You could argue that the scene foreshadows Gollum's treachery later on in the film, but I think the ending of The Two Towers already did that. The killing of Saruman scene is a fantastic sequence that ends the Saruman plotline and also serves as payoff for King Theoden with his speech to the former White Wizard. The scene also shows how Pippin is able to find the Palantir, instead of it just appearing where it is out of nowhere. Saruman the traitor being stabbed by his own henchman and being impaled by one of his own machines is a much better and rewarding fate than him being locked in his tower in humiliation and to wallow in his defeat. However, the directors and writers wanted to emphasize the ring and leave Saruman in the last movie, so I understand why it didn't get into the theatrical cut. Either way, Merry and Pippin are reunited with our other characters again and head off to Edoras to celebrate the victory at Helm's Deep. We get some comedy from Merry and Pippin singing and Legolas and Gimli having a drinking contest, but the narrative moves forward with Theoden recognizing Eowyn's affection for Aragorn, and Aragorn and Gandalf discussing Frodo. We then have Pippin being a curious fool as he always is and accidentally letting Sauron see him through the Palantir, but is able to get a glimpse of the Dark Lord's plan to attack the capital city of Gondor, Minas Tirith. Gandalf then takes off for the city with Pippin to warn the Gondorians of the incoming attack from Mordor. Now let's talk about a small change from book to film that I think was very smart, waiting until the third film to reforge the Sword of Elendil to give to Aragorn. Having Aragorn get the sword right before the Fellowship sets off to Rivendell, like how it happens in the book, would not have worked in the films, and having Aragorn get the sword in this film adds to the visualization of him being the king. Also, it's a good way to show more of why Arwen chooses to deny immortality and stay in Middle-earth. The city of Minas Tirith is one of the greatest fictional cities we've gotten in cinematic history. The shots of Gandalf charging down, or I should say up, the streets of the city's rings were a great way to show the design of the city so it can be used in the battle scenes later. We are also introduced to the steward of the city, Lord Denethor II, who is the father of both Boromir and Faramir. This character is quite a different one from a lot of the human characters we've been introduced to so far. He's introduced as a grieving man, full of sorrow over his lost son, but he's also shown to be very paranoid and also stubborn at the same time. Aside from his interest in hearing Pippin's report of Boromir's death, the steward makes it clear that he's not in the mood to be planning anything. So Gandalf and Pippin leave the man in his grief, so that Gandalf can give more exposition about the city and Middle-earth geography. The character of the Witch King is always an interesting one to talk about because in the book there's already a narrative set up about who he is in the story and how he can be defeated. But you can't really do that in the films. Having Gandalf give exposition describing this character while cutting to him preparing for battle, I think was the best way to do that. On top of cutting back and forth to Frodo and Sam and Gollum approaching the home of the Witch King himself. After seeing the Lord of the Nazgul leave Minas Morgul with his hosts, we return to the ruined city of Osgiliath. The sequence does a good job at setting up the forces of Sauron as this overwhelming force that comes upon our characters almost without warning, and it builds the tension of who's going to stop this army. The entire sequence of the lighting of the beacons is fantastic. You have huge shots of the mountains, joined with grand music. It gets its job done. Aragorn rushes into Theoden's court to tell everyone that Gondor calls for aid, and Rohan will answer. Theoden begins to move out from Edoras and sends out riders to gather as many horsemen as they can to the rendezvous point at the mountain of Dunharrow. Merry decides to take his chance to become a part of Rohan's army, and the king agrees. Faramir tries his best to defend Osgiliath, but he's forced to retreat. After some help from Gandalf, Faramir tells the wizard and Pippin that he's seen Frodo and Sam. Then Faramir has to face the limited and narrow reactions of his father, who keeps bringing up how Boromir would not have failed him. Upon rewatching this scene, I think it was genius to have Denethor trip over himself and see a mirage of Boromir, because it contributes to the narrative that this man is slowly descending into madness. Meanwhile, Frodo, Sam, and Gollum are climbing up the secret stairs. We started to get some of this earlier, but Gollum has a plan to separate Frodo and Sam, but we're not quite sure how he's going to do that yet. The next few scenes are heartbreaking. Pippin and Faramir have a quick introduction to each other, and they really hit it off. Pippin gets sworn in as a member of the Citadel Guard, and Denethor tries to get Faramir to attempt a retake of Osgiliath. Faramir almost immediately agrees to accomplish this order. The scene of Faramir and his men trotting down the city's streets is a picture that echoes many paintings of knights leaving their cities with the women and children watching them. Normally this would be an inspiring image, but in the context of this film, it's horrible. Gandalf tries to convince Faramir not to throw his life away, but Faramir cannot be swayed. He had made his identity on impressing his father, and once he realizes he can't do that, he feels he has nothing left to live for. We all feel terrible about Faramir's situation, and so does his new friend Pippin. The way the sequence cuts back and forth between Faramir and his men charging into their doom and their lord up in his house eating his food makes us all feel sick, because we're so angry that this is happening. This could be considered commentary on how wars are fought, with the brave disposable soldiers following orders by getting themselves killed, while their leader is fortified and safe. All the emotions that we all feel are felt by Pippin, and we see that when he finishes his song. This is when the devious Gollum makes his move. Frodo sending Sam away like this wasn't in the book, but it added to the dramatic tension that a film benefits from. Having the two friends separate contributes to this film's trend of having tragedies before victories. Also, having Frodo be alone makes the scene coming up much scarier. Our other characters and the Riders of Rohan gather at the foot of Dun Harrow. Since this is the last meet before the approaching battle, there's a lot of different character moments. Aragorn knows that they are still greatly outnumbered despite having amassed 6,000 horsemen. After Elrond comes and encourages him to summon the dead army that dwells within Dun Harrow, it's made clear that Aragorn was considering this all along. But there was one thing he needed to prove his heritage, the Sword of Elendil, or Andúril as it's now called. As Aragorn prepares to leave, Éowyn says she wants to go with him, not understanding his mission. It's here that Aragorn finally sets the boundary with Éowyn by telling her that he can't give her what she wants. She'll eventually thank him for this. Our three hunters once again separate themselves from everyone else to ride towards the paths of the dead. Let's talk about Theoden's decision to make Éowyn and Merry stay behind at their camp, because without reading the book, this can be easily misunderstood. Theoden wants Éowyn to stay, not because she's a woman and women just don't fight, but because he feels like he needs to protect her to make up for his previous absence from her life. Theoden wants Merry to stay behind, not because he's a hobbit and would just be baggage on their gallop, but because he started to see Merry as one of his sons that he has to protect. Theoden's mistake here is that Éowyn and Merry are both adults, they're not little children, and he needs to respect their choices even if he doesn't agree with them. I think the bottom line here is that King Theoden still feels guilty for not being there to protect his own son, Theothred, who was killed off-screen in the last film. Theoden isn't being a condescending or picky warlord, he's being an overprotective father. In this way, he's like the character of Elrond, who tried to force his own child to take the path he wanted her to take. So Theoden and his horsemen begin their ride to Minas Tirith, and Aragorn and his companions enter the paths of the dead. This scene is better, I think, with the extended edition, but this is a scene where I definitely would have made some creative changes. I've personally never been the biggest fan of having the Oathbreakers be green and zombie looking. I think it just looks goofy at times and they were trying too hard to be scary. I'm not mad about it, but you can tell it wasn't something they nailed. Anyhow, Aragorn asks them to fight at his side to be released from their current state. The Oathbreakers retreat at first, but as Aragorn looks at the Gondorian villages being burned, the King of the Dead comes and tells them that they will stay and fight for him. As Sauron's army approaches Minas Tirith, it's quickly revealed that Faramir has survived while his teammates are getting their heads catapulted into the city's walls by the orcs. Denethor gives into despair as he sees the vast army at his doorstep. This is when Gandalf steps in, beats the Mad Leader down, and assumes command of the Gondorian soldiers. Now the siege of Minas Tirith begins. After a brief catapult and trebuchet exchange, the Nazgul fill the role of an air raid by swooping down and not only plowing through the soldiers, but also spreading fear throughout their hearts and minds. We start to see Gandalf as a military leader here who not only sounds awesome shouting commands at his men, but also is able to get hands-on. The orcs bring up their ultimate battering ram, Grond, to smash through the city's massive gates. Miles away, Gollum leads Frodo into the tunnel at the top of the secret stairs. Frodo quickly realizes that he has been led into a trap and finds himself alone against whatever carved out this tunnel. This scene is one of the best directed scenes in the franchise. Peter Jackson uses his own childhood fear of spiders to bring Tolkien's spider, Shelob, to life. The audience sees Frodo wandering through the tunnel trying to find his way out, while seeing webs and corpses everywhere. Then we see the monstrous spider attack our hero, and we get to see him use his gift from Galadriel for the first time too. This is almost like a horror movie scene with our main character trying to escape from the monster, only to get caught in its trap, to get strung up in a giant web. Frodo then sees Gollum again and is furious and gets a second wind he needs to fight through his entanglement and escape the spider's den. Frodo and Gollum have a brief fight, with Frodo reminding Gollum that he's trying to save him. Gollum isn't having any of it though and ends up being knocked over a ledge by Frodo. Frodo then makes his way further up the pass to Cirith Ungol. Then Shelob appears again, and despite being so big, her movements are completely silent. She then stabs Frodo and wraps him up with her webs. But Sam returns with Sting and the file. The fight between Sam and Shelob isn't really anything special, but it's awesome in light of what's happened so far. We are cheering for Sam the whole time he struggles against this much larger foe. After he causes the spider to retreat back into his tunnels, he incorrectly assumes that Frodo has been killed. It takes overhearing the conversation amongst a group of orcs coming down from Cirith Ungol and taking Frodo back with them for Sam to realize his mistake. While the army breaks through the city's gates, Denethor has gone over the edge and is about to burn himself and Faramir on a pyre. Pippin tries to stop him, but it's no use. He goes to find Gandalf to get help, and the two of them race to save Faramir. In the extended cut, though, they are cut off by the Witch King. Now, this scene is good, but I wouldn't have the Witch King shattering Gandalf's staff. I know they were doing this to try and build up the Witch King's power, but seeing this only to have the same character being killed by Eowyn and Merry in, minutes later, makes this whole part of the film be inconsistent. I would just have him drawing out his flaming sword, but then he stops when he hears the horns of Rohan. The 6,000 riders of Rohan have arrived. In the last film, this nation was corrupt and weak, but not anymore. King Theoden gives one last speech to his men, and they all chant "Death, death," over and over and over again. Then they make a huge wave of horsemen galloping in full sprint into the side of the massive army of orcs, with Theoden at the very front, to make this the greatest army charge in cinema history without question. So begins the Battle of Pelennor Fields. Meanwhile, Denethor has drenched himself in oil, as well as Faramir, and asks his men to set them both on fire. Gandalf and Pippin burst into the room to stop this madness from continuing, but the steward rips a torch from his guard and proclaims that there is ultimately no hope in defeating Sauron, and throws the torch down on the pyre. Gandalf and Pippin rush to save Faramir, and the steward sees his son open his eyes one last time to see him, his own father, burning. The mad steward then runs frantically towards the edge of the city's top level and throws himself off. They never showed this, but they heavily alluded to it. Denethor had a Palantir in his possession. The eyes of the White Tower were not blind, but were deceived. Denethor saw what was coming for him, the army from Minas Morgul, but also the approaching fleet of Corsair ships. He wanted things to go a certain way, as they had always been, with him being at the top, and when they weren't, he became mad and malevolent, and only spread doom and gloom throughout his own ranks. You could say that when he died, so did the faithlessness that he had brought upon his people, and the division the enemy had orchestrated amongst the steward's knights, for the enemy was not blind either. On the fields below, the riders of Rohan have made the orcs start to fall back, but the enemy had another force coming. A line of 20 Mumakil armed to the teeth. The first few shots of the Harajim's war beasts are awesome, whether it's the first shot of them all in a line, the commander blowing his war horn and hearing the chanting, or the lead Oliphant swinging his tusks into the horses. The giant creatures begin to plow through the riders of Rohan. There seems to be no way to stop the moment kill. That is until Éomer gives us the best spear throw in cinematic history. Sorry Achilles, but Éomer did a better job. Then the Witch King flies down to fight with Theoden. The King of Rohan is then crushed by his horse, but before the fell beast can tear him to pieces, Éowyn cuts off its head, and the Witch King rises from the ground, wielding the most ridiculous flail you will ever see in any movie ever. The scene, of course, ends with Merry stabbing the Witch King in the back and Éowyn landing the killing blow. Before King Theoden dies, he gets to see his niece one last time. This being the altered yet good send-off for one of the most misunderstood characters in these movies. At the same time, Aragorn and his companions arrive on the Corsair ships with the army of the dead behind them. The armies of the enemy are quickly outmatched by the immortal warriors, but the battle can't end before Legolas gets yet another badass action movie moment. If you thought he didn't get enough of these in these films, don't worry, there's a lot more of it coming. As our characters search the battlefield, Éomer finds Éowyn gravely injured after her fight with the Witch King. It's here that they pretty much wrap up the story between Aragorn and Éowyn, with Aragorn using his skills to save Éowyn's life. Aragorn still cares about her, but it doesn't have to be romantic at all. The thing missing from the Houses of Healing sequence here would be Aragorn helping Merry, but they changed this to give us a scene where it's just Merry and Pippin seeing each other again. Things are not going well for Frodo. He's been stripped of all of his things and is tied up at the top of the Tower of Cirith Ungol. The orc captains start fighting each other over Frodo's things, primarily his mithril shirt, and all the orcs start killing each other. This is the way it went in the book, and this has always been the spot where Tolkien went into the plot convenience realm so that Sam can get into the fortress and rescue Frodo and return the ring to him. So our two hobbits finally get into Mordor. In Minas Tirith, Aragorn and Gandalf debate on what to do to help Frodo. Aragorn and Legolas propose to rally their forces to march on the Black Gate of Mordor as a distraction to keep the enemy occupied. Gandalf doubts that Sauron would fall for this, but Aragorn reassures him that it will work. Now, the extended cut does feature Aragorn essentially looking through Saruman's Palantir and speaking to Sauron, calling him out for battle. This scene is really cool because for a few frames it's confirmed that Sauron did indeed have a physical form at this point. But we end up seeing Aragorn lead the force of Rohirrim and Gondorian soldiers on a march towards the enemy's great gates, either way. Frodo and Sam run into some trouble while trying to get across the plains of Golgoroth. Since they've dressed themselves in orc armor, they get thrown into a band of orcs marching towards the Black Gate. After causing a fight amongst the orcs, they're able to get away and continue their traverse of the barren plain. Outside the Black Gate, Aragorn and his companions have arrived. Aragorn, Gandalf, and our other characters then ride up to the gate, and Aragorn calls out for Sauron to ride out to meet him. Sauron's attention is turned towards the descendant of the man that once took his ring from his grasp. The next scene is where Sean Astin, acting as Sam, is at his peak. Frodo is unable to keep going, and Sam realizes he must physically carry Frodo while Frodo carries the ring. The quest is coming to an end, and our other characters know that as well. At the Black Gates, they're outnumbered once again, and they don't run away. And Aragorn reminds us of why they're here, for Frodo. Then he, his friends, and their forces charge headfirst into the forces of Golgoroth. Sam and Frodo are almost at the crack of doom, but Gollum has finally caught up to them once again and attacks them. As Gollum goes for the ring, Frodo reminds Smeagol of his promise, and Smeagol says that he lied, showing the audience that Smeagol was not the victim that we thought he was, and that the creature had no good in him the whole time. Frodo makes his way into the crack of doom and holds out the ring to finally rid himself of it. But the ring has gotten into his mind and has deceived him, and Frodo says, "The ring is mine." As he puts it on, Sauron knows where he is and immediately summons the Nazgul to fly towards Mount Doom to take back his prize. Gollum attacks Frodo and rips the ring from him. In this moment, all else but the ring fades from Gollum's mind. He's overjoyed that he's finally gotten it back after so long. But his joy is short-lived as Frodo tries to fight Gollum to get the ring, resulting in Gollum plunging into the lava below along with the ring, destroying the weapon of the enemy once and for all. By the Black Gate, our other characters see the Dark Tower crumble to the ground, and Sauron's eye dissolves and explodes in a shockwave of energy and air, causing Golgoroth to split right down the middle and sends its armies into the earth. Then Mount Doom erupts, and Frodo and Sam are able to get above the lava. The two friends begin to remember their home, the Shire, Gandalf's fireworks, and who they would have ended up with if things had been different. Frodo and Sam are the archetypal best friends, and they both accept that this is the end for them. However, it isn't the end, and Gandalf and some of the Eagles who had joined them earlier at the Battle of Black Gate rescue Frodo and Sam from their fate. This is when Frodo finally gets to see his old friend Gandalf again, and they're right back where they were 21 years ago outside Hobbiton. Then the other members of the Fellowship enter the room, each reacting in their own ways to their friend being alive, and the quest being completed. Now Aragorn is crowned as the High King of Gondor, and it's a great moment of celebration in combination with him and Arwen being reunited, with Elrond accepting his daughter's choice and being happy for her. Aragorn then gives his 4 Hobbit companions the respect they deserve, and he has himself, Arwen, and the Gondorians bow low to them. Then we finally return to the Shire, and our characters start to get on with their lives again. Among other things, Sam gets married and Frodo gets to live at Back End again. The 4 soldiers could never describe the terrors they had seen to anyone, besides to their friends that had gone through it with them. Frodo can't really move on, though, despite it being all over, so after he writes down his travels into Bilbo's manuscript, he knows he has to leave Middle-earth. As the last ship is about to leave Middle-earth for Valinor, Elrond, Galadriel, Celeborn, and Gandalf give Bilbo and Frodo a chance to join them. Gandalf bids his little friends one last farewell, and reminds them not to dwell on this. Frodo also hugs his friends goodbye and tells Sam that Bilbo's book has some pages left that he wants Sam to fill in. As Sam is back at his house in Hobbiton, he ends with his line from the book, "Well, I'm back." The Return of the King is definitely one of the biggest and most epic films ever made. The scale and scope of the trilogy comes to its peak, whether it's the conversations, the battles, whatever it may be, it's at its prime here. Our Fellowship's quest is completed. The movie does have some things that I'll pick on from time to time, but it doesn't end up having a big effect in the end for me. This film is certainly well deserving of its 11 Academy Awards, and I will give it a 9.9 out of 10. With that, everyone, thank you all so much for joining me today, and if you made it this far, good job to you, and please remember to leave a like, comment down below, and subscribe for more content about movies. That's all for now, and I'll see you all next time.